Okay, so let me just begin with what is the goal of today's meeting. It is going to be quite brief. It is just 2 hours, but let me share with you my screen so that you can see what we have in mind. Okay, so over the last 2 days, we hear from a lot of very interesting developments in AI for astronomy, for multi-messenger astrophysics, for high-energy physics. And even though they are disparate areas of research, challenges are different, there is one thing that is common to all of them. We want to do fast inference. Data sets are complex. Some of them are large volume, others are high speed, and so on and so forth. But there is one thing that is bringing us all together, which is the need for better signal processing tools, the need for a better utilization of computing resources, which are finite, and they are, for the most part, oversubscribed. So there is no way around. We need to innovate, right? And we're, just humans, and in the process of innovation, there is always a sociological barrier that we need to go and address, overcome, and eventually, if things are done properly, then there is the emergence of novel signal processing tools. We have a lot of examples how this is happening in industry. And as I said in the first day, if all of us were to stop doing AI, this wouldn't be the end of the world, because most of the innovation happening in AI comes from applications in industry. So at this point, it is important to realize that there needs to be a virtuous cycle of collaboration between academia and industry. It is also well known that innovation in industry now, it is still using innovation that happened over 10 years ago, and they also need to start adopting new development. So it is a symbiotic need, and we need to take advantage of this. Now, the second day, we heard from Xia Wen, from Paul Morin, from people representing industry, and from some colleagues in Illinois that are part of the HDR project. They are developing foundational AI algorithms for a number of different applications. And this is a very deliberate process. We invited them because you heard the first day, University of Washington, MIT, and us, UIUC. We are part of this HDR project, along with a CSSI project that is quite synergistic. And the NSF is very pleased with what we have produced over the last year. And they gave us a number of recommendations. So the actual recommendation is beyond multi-messenger astrophysics and high-energy physics. It may be good if you go and reach out or embrace other communities that may benefit from your work. And this is geosciences and extreme scale computing in terms of simulations. And this is what we have done. We have reached out to leaders of those communities. And what comes next is we are going to present this expanded team, okay? And this is going to be through documents. We are going to write a brief white paper based on what we have accomplished in this conference. We are going to present our expanded team. We are going to document what we have learned over the last couple of days. And we are going to present the plan of action going forward. So this white paper is not just about telling people, look, AI is growing really fast. And the level of maturity that it has achieved in a couple of years is outstanding. All of that is well known. What we want to say is, we know that these are the challenges we need to overcome in the future. This is a team that we have created to do that. We have expanded the team, including the disciplines that I just mentioned. And then we're going to open the floor to the community to hear from them, to know exactly what are the needs that need to be addressed through an institute of this nature, And then we're going to work around those needs. And the plan now is to have this document out within the next couple of weeks, and then organize the next town hall, where we are going to hear from the members of the community that are participating in this process. And then we're going to have this back and forth cycle until we have a well-defined agenda that we're going to present in a proposal to the NSF. So this is the plan. And at this point, what I would like to do is to hear from you, from Shawen, Eric, Dan, Cheche, and others, Vlad, about what would be a good time, just planning ahead, when we would like to organize the next town hall where we do exactly what I described. We present the expanded team, and then we address comments and suggestions that we have from the community around that time. So go ahead and raise your hand. And obviously, the invitation is for everyone who's here. Patrick was also invited yesterday to share with us the exciting things that are happening in SEMA. And so, this is the time to understand how we can engage going forward. Dan?
Yeah, sorry, as a co-host, I can't raise my hand. I guess, so I was just thinking about two different things. One, as I said in chat, is I'd love to hear a little bit from Phil about how the new AI Institute relates to the existing HDR project, and in particular, kind of how it also might relate to a new HDR proposal, kind of what the overlaps might be and what the distinction might be, maybe more importantly. But the other thing that I was going to say just before that is that I think the biggest challenge that I see here is that we've talked about a lot of different ideas, and I feel like these ideas have different kind of different axes that we could express them on. So one is disciplinary, where we kind of started off somewhat narrow in terms of MMA and high energy physics, and potentially could broaden into geosciences and some other areas. And then there's kind of a technology one in some sense about, if I look at work on AI methods and AI models, kind of how focused that is. Is it AI methods and AI models specifically for real-time activities and for short or for transient activities? Is it more broad than that? Do we talk about the infrastructure that's needed to do this at scale as well, and to bring in all the data? So do we get into data lakes and identity management systems that might be important in these cases? So I feel like I feel like that's actually the biggest challenge, is that this is just such a big space that we need to figure out what part of it we want to focus on.
All right, I can answer Dan's question about how this fits with the AI Institute. And actually, it's even a more complicated question, because I'm part of IRIS, have this HDR and the AI Institute. So it makes it even more complicated. So with the AI Institute, the goal here is ab initio physics, or ab initio AI. So physics motivated AI. So the idea there is that the work in the Institute is mostly on what we would call like algorithm design, and really physics motivated algorithm design. And so there's a kind of aspect of, symmetries and stuff that feed into AI, and then like with physics, and then there's the reverse, right? How do new AI technologies feed into physics? That in this project, the HDR, at least the way we wrote it, the motivation was to take these algorithms and deploy them in real experiments. And so the HDR, the way I view it is that a lot of it, there's some work on algorithm design, but a lot of the core work is on like showing that this works, in a real system, right? And doing the end-to-end demonstration, showing, this is the computing infrastructure we need. This is the AI design we need, and here's how we link everything together. And actually, with Iris Update, that was the way we made a split along similar lines, where in Iris Hub, the idea would be there's a so-called innovative algorithms part of Iris Hub, so the idea is that the algorithm would be developed in Iris Hub, but it would be deployed through the HDR. So really, this is how how the lines were split. It was mostly based on what the motivations for each of the projects were. I mean, the HDR proposal, the way we wrote it was really about showing end to end, right? That we can run accelerated AI in workflows for LIGO and HEP, and that's really what our focus has been in the first year. So we have actually a lot of nice algorithms. And so it's been like, trying to build the infrastructure. There's certainly more work, I would say, especially there's more work coming down along the lines in terms of newer algorithms, and we could certainly elevate that. And there's certainly more work towards integrating this into the systems. But we've done there's been a lot of work a year ago, we've done like a proof of concept of how we could deploy these algorithms. So I think, if we want to build this to like a larger scale institute, we could go along the lines of here's how we make a sustainable like software and hardware stack that we could use to process the data. It doesn't touch so much on the algorithm design, but it's certainly that's one way to approach it. I'm not sure if that's exactly how we want to align though.
Right. So so thanks. I think that's really helpful. I guess I'm just going to say one or two more things, and I'll stop. I guess one of them is that I feel like if we're going to be writing something that we're thinking about as a proposal, one important thing that we should be thinking about is what we're not going to do. And so it would be good to start kind of figuring out what's out of scope as much as where we're going to focus on what's in scope. And then the other thing that I was also thinking about is before I was saying these kind of disciplinary access and kind of technology access, I think at least one other axis that we should probably think about also is people, and how much we're going to be working in education and training and building communities, which I think in the AI Institute, probably, I actually don't know about Phil's, but in at least the ones that I've seen parts of seems to be a fairly major part. And in the HDR ones, it probably isn't, but I don't, I guess, know that for sure. If we were kind of all sitting around in one room and we had a whiteboard, I'd kind of be very tempted at this point to start kind of drawing axes and trying to figure out where we are. I don't know quite how to do that here if we're taking notes in some kind of common document or anything, but okay, thanks.
Yeah, so all of these comments, I'm going to circulate them in a Google Doc then at the end of the meeting. And yeah, this is exactly what we need to define at the moment. So if you want, the baseline here is what Phil mentioned. We had a clear vision and mission based on HDR. And then what NSF told us is, this is pretty good. You're doing really good work. For an institute, you actually need to do the following. And the following was invite people like Paul and Shawen, and then try to create a broader scope following recommendations from NSF about how the work that we are doing may benefit them. And I think Paul made the case yesterday that there is a great need to apply these algorithms, and also Shawen, to address their big data needs. And I think that is a natural connection. So just to make sure that we are not presenting this just like a composite of different disciplines, what we want to present is the high-level vision of this. We want to present the commonalities and emphasize those as opposed to the disparate ideas. Otherwise, this is going to look, not very coherent. So I would say that the common thread here is what Phil mentioned: development of tools that can work for real scenarios processing of big data sets, acceleration of these methodologies. And that would be a nice way to present something that looks narrow enough. And then we have a number of disciplines that have the same challenges. And community building, that's essential. And I think that will be the goal of this document that we want to produce within the next 10 days. And then Xiaowen, Paul, and us in our different communities, we can circulate this, then gather comments from the respective communities, and then move forward with all that knowledge at hand.
Yeah, a few quick remarks. It's very intriguing to figure out commonalities if what NSF is suggesting to make this as cross-cutting as possible, from the hardware side, the software side, algorithm side, the AI sort of architecture side. So valuable exercise for, I think, for a project like this is to sort out, as we diversify applications, what would be common and how to translate. I think this is the term that you mentioned, how to translate, across the commonalities, and what would be the differences we also have to address as we go through different domains. And, you probably recognize domain knowledge incorporation into AI approaches now is a quite important and popular area of research. So I think that's a comment. When you said we would run town hall meetings, so how broad audience you want to engage? Because the community scope could be pretty sizable. So that's a question. Another question is, what will likely be the timeline, for such a proposal? Because we also need to be mindful of, how quickly you want to put together a proposal with regard to what would be the sort of community footprints you want to cover to get their inputs and stitch the pieces together.
So quick answer to this. The deadline for this proposal is in the spring of 2021.
Okay.
And how big do we want to go? I think there will be two ways of doing this. When we have the next town hall, hopefully 1 month from now, you want to identify, just to begin this in an organized manner, you want to identify people who are leading these activities in your community, and then invite them to hear their thoughts. The same for Paul. We're going to have this document where people can go and dump their questions. And then when we have the next town hall, it is up to you to decide how big you want to go advertising this event. Okay.
So when we run this town hall, maybe this is still in the early planning stage. Would we go community specific, meaning say, we want to run a meeting and this will be sort of geo community, that one would be another astronomers and so on. So it would be targeted community once at a time, right?
Right.
Okay.
Patrick?
Or you want to mix them together?
It might be better to mix, to be honest, because, a big concern, right, the concern we had, discussing to NSF officers is that, and I think this is true for any community, is that in HD, they don't want to fund necessarily one community. If they can fund multiple across domains, it actually is more beneficial in terms of funding, right? And I think it adds a lot of strength to a proposal. So if we can all start speaking the same language, at least in some part of the domain, then I think it helps a lot. So.
One thing I've been thinking of listening this morning is I have a community with applications. It's geospatial. There are very uniform data types. We have an immense amount of data, and we have concrete science goals. And so if we can work from where we are backwards into the AI space and talk about how that AI space, both software, algorithms, workflow, community building is uniform between Xiaowen and I, plus that kind of geospatial, along with like astronomy or whatever other groups we are. I don't have the expertise within AI to talk about that kind of unified upstream vision. And so if that vision can be made, I could do everything from there down, but I can't go farther upstream. See, even if we're talking about, the packages, and that they're, this is what exists right now, and it works across all these domains. And it's a matter of bridging these communities. Then I can bring the communities in. You heard from Anna yesterday that, she has problems right now. And what we're missing is basically from the imagery upstream into the AI.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's a great point. I think we actually see a broad swath of application cases, including the ones you would be well positioned to mobilize. I think from my side, what I might be of a little help is, since I have some sort of AI experience more from the application side, I think that needs to be addressed, connecting the applications to the AI stack of things, for lack of better words. But I think that part and the application part and the pure AI innovation, in my mind, are three sort of bubbles we need to intersect. Just as thinking between you and me, Paul, we could be complementary in a sense. My experience, I would still say limited, but this area is growing and should grow in a sense, to be able to link AI with sort of the massive geospatial application domains you were alluded to.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, finish up, Shawan, sorry.
Yeah, so I was going to say this bridge between core AI innovation and applications, because there's this application-specific AI pieces. Although among different application domains, these pieces could be common, but a lot of times they're not common. So our institute, I think, potentially should address how we evolve the commonalities so that they are broadly valuable to all kinds of applications, but at the same time recognize the differences. So these are sort of domain-specific AI capabilities to the degree we want to generalize best, but at the same time recognize the diversity of applications. I think if we engage broader communities to do this, this is perhaps a critical middle layer of knowledge we would have to work hard at.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. I think Eliu and I kind of slightly offline decided that I'm going to try to help moderate, and Eliu is going to kind of work more on notes. So let's try to use the hands thing under participants. I'm hoping that everybody knows how to do that, and we'll try to use that to make sure that nobody gets left out that wants to say something. So Patrick is next.
Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of follow up on some of this. I guess, can either Eliu or somebody or Phil, can you succinctly say what is the value added by the institute that you're conceiving? Because what I hear at the moment, right, is certainly innovation on the algorithmic application side in domains. But what I haven't heard is your mission as bringing what is the added value. So do you have a thought? Like, do you have a framing of that? I have some other questions as well, but let me start with that one, because it's sort of the piece what I'm hearing is let's come together and do science with AI and ML. And I think that's great, but is that really what you think the Institute is, or is it a venue to have people come together for workshops, to allow fellows, to support postdocs at a single venue. How are you thinking about?
So Phil?
So I can comment on the origin of the current HDR, let's say, proposal. Is that, I mean, Eliu and I and Eric, we had all, the focus was to do real-time AI. So in the case of multi-messenger astronomy, there's a clear case of you want to run low latency algorithms, right? You want to run things as fast as you can. And high energy physics, this is, let's say, kind of our biggest limiting factor at the moment is how fast can you run these? Like the current, if you look at the way industry is going and the way they deploy AI systems, it's not necessarily low latency. There are a few niche applications. So for example, search engines, those are low latency. But like a lot of AI these days is not targeting kind of low latency or even small batch. And so the niche here was that we had clear scientific applications where we wanted to run AI in real-time systems. And so we came together with the idea of, how do we deploy a real-time AI system at a scientific experiment? That was the origin of this. How this expands to an institute is a longer discussion, so I won't comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Elio. Sorry, I was muted.
Sorry, I cannot raise my hand. Only.
Yeah. Yep.
So one other thing, in addition to what Phil mentioned, one thing that we also identified is that when we are in the process of creating these real-time algorithms, there is really no need to reproduce or duplicate efforts. And so one aspect that we are pushing forward with this HDR grant is to make open source algorithms and then leverage other resources so that the field can move faster. So something that we have been doing with people at Argonne and University of Chicago is to put these algorithms on the Data and Learning Hub for Science. And they now provide resources so that they can run the algorithms. People can go and check on reproducibility and all of these things. And we do this in a way that people have a really hard time messing things up. The algorithms are containerized. You just need to go and run the model. It is plug and play. And so this is the other aspect, mirroring what industry has done with the release of these state-of-the-art neural nets for image classification and whatnot. And this is what we want to do, standardize the use of these algorithms, the access to them, and further development. And I think this is a lot of added value because there are many fields in the past that have developed really cool algorithms and they remain closed source. People know about them, but they cannot use them. And that hinders the progress of the field. So what we're doing is to be as open as possible, to provide all the tools so that people can go and hit the ground running. And this is going to accelerate the development of these algorithms. This is added value. And along the way, we are also training the next generation of practitioners. And we're giving them a broader perspective. There is no problem if you do academia and industry at the same time. It is actually a big plus in the training process. So this is diversity in the way we see AI, how we apply it, and how we can help people expand their vision for their careers. So that is added value as well.
Okay, so Chris is next, and then Eric, who I guess is Eric a co-host and can't raise his hand as well? I'm not quite sure why, but okay. Anyhow, Chris is next.
Thanks. I had a more general question because I only got looped into this, I guess, last week. So I'm coming from a different HDR project, and I was just wondering, what's the scope or legacy of an institute that you're thinking about? Are you at the point that you're right now, like early on in the community building phases and just trying to identify people, or do you have an idea about like what the type of legacy that you would want to have, mainly relative to other institutes? Because a lot of the themes you guys are discussing, I think, get discussed in I don't know, many community building efforts.
So I guess Ellie or Phil, if you want to respond before we get to Eric, or I don't know if Eric was going to respond to that. Go ahead.
So thanks for the question, Chris. It is true. I think that a lot of people are in the community building process. We are at that stage. And I think this is the goal of this meeting, as I said in the opening comments for this meeting the first day. We heard about what people are doing with AI, but the key goal of this meeting is to start the community building process, to create a team that will respond to this institute idea in the spring of 2021. And we are not making anything up. The choice of speakers for the second day was very deliberate because we are responding to NSF guidance about what should be the scope and breadth of such an institute, HDR institute. And I think what we have heard yesterday resonates very well with the guidance we got from NSF. I think the recommendations were spot on. And hearing now from Paul, from Shawen, and from other people yesterday, I think we are in the right direction. We see a lot of commonalities in the needs that we have. And so, yes, that process is ongoing at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
So, sorry. Okay, so I was just going to jump in for a second and say that I think NSF provides guidance, but NSF doesn't provide instruction. And so I think the question about how seriously to take the guidance, maybe how strongly to act on the guidance as instruction versus as guidance is always a good one. If it's NSF saying, here are some kinds of things that would be useful versus NSF saying, here's something you should do. Anyhow, so, okay, but Eric was next.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So I think Eliu and Phil captured well some of the aspects of what went into the present HDR as well as how to move forward. Going back maybe to Patrick's question of what is the added value, I think there is quite a good example to give of what happened over the a year and a few months that we're into this HDR, namely the fact that we've taken a problem, and if you wish, we abstracted it so that we can get expertise and knowledge from, in this case, from our Harnings and physics colleagues into exploring methods and computational solutions that we wouldn't have explored otherwise. And I think in the process, we've engaged in back and forth, both by training students that are normally doing gravitational wave astrophysics into something that probably would not have materialized without that HDR, which is phase one award. And so the way I would see it, maybe 2 years down the road, is that whoever else in the community that is either engaged as part of the Future Center and Future Institute, or otherwise, to be able to get resources for whenever they have, let's say, data-intensive science and engineering. So, and the value that the institute is going to be adding is going to bring expertise for solutions that were already provided, or they can be improved from other disciplines into the specific problems that we're addressing, like the problem that that Paul was describing. And I think the idea of that center is that maybe not necessarily, offload the computational part to, somebody at in Eliu's groups or in Phil's group, but instead bring your students, bring your incoming postdocs, and in a matter of maybe a few months, as it was the case, let's say in our case, to be able to take the actual solution into your hands, providing, if you wish, the advising and help, so that you don't have to rediscover the wheel. So I think all in all, when it comes to data intensive science and engineering, I think the Institute can provide solutions and expertise from across the disciplines. And at the same time, let's say you may ask, okay, what is in it for, let's say, the high energy physics community into that? Well, I think as part of this process, and of course, given a different physical problem that's being solved and computational problem that's being solved in the detail, I think it enables improving, let's say, the models and solutions that maybe they are offering. And actually, as part of that, beyond, I think some computational, completely new computational models that we wouldn't have investigated otherwise, we're now sitting down and discussing them, like, let's say, as a service solution for at least the gravitational wave physics. So I think this is something that it is worth identifying on what we have accomplished so far. And I think there is going to be value for other areas, for example, in geosciences, to engage into a future institute.
Yes. Shi. Sorry, I'm not
Yes,
sure.
yeah, this is Shijie from University of Washington. I still remember just not too long ago, like more than a year ago, that when I first chatted with Phil about during this HDR proposal, and there was a clear message at the time. This is going to be a hardware project, and it's different from the Iris Hab, emphasize software, and now there's a physics science-driven AI. But in the I5 proposal that Phil was in right now, and it's also have another direction, that is how AI can also feedback to open a new science study. So I'm thinking about what's the next for this coming up HDR proposal, and will that still be hardware driven? When I say hardware driven, actually what we mean really try to not just get an algorithm and can be really deployed into an actual production system, be used in actual the experiment in science, or the actual system that perhaps will be industry will be already encounter, have an issue there, and then would like to make it to be the actual using whatever science field or the industry field. So I see that during this process, and there's a direction moving toward study the engineer solution for low latency and a small batch and real-time system. For example, and Song gave a talk about this tiny ML, and this is very the project that I did not think about that to be involved, or to be something that connect to what particle physics would have without involving into this HDR and phase ML project. And Daniel mentioned very beginning that for this meeting, it might be interesting to talk about what we are not going to do, that if we want to move forward and to identify the scope of the next town hall meeting. This will be something interesting to discuss further, and whether the scope try to highlight following the original idea of this HDR, that or at least originally from the beginning, that is focus on the appreciation AI and focus on the real-time AI system, or there's an interest we want to expand further, because if you want to go further, it might not necessarily make this institute be unique. But if we don't expand enough, then this is not really at the institute level proposal. So I would like to invite everyone and maybe share with us a little bit through this today's excellent presentation workshop, and we have a lot of inspiration. And in your view, like to join HDR Institute proposal, which direction do you think is the scope that you personally would like to involve, or you think you would like an institute to try to push forward?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just jump in with one thing, and then we'll see who else puts their hands up, or in particular, anybody that hasn't spoken would be great to hear from at this point. But the one thing that I put in chat that I think is worth actually thinking about a little bit is that I think that some of the visualization related activities that we're thinking about, in particular, some of the things that Paul has talked about yesterday and that Anna works on as well, and the ice wedge polygon things, actually are a lot closer to biomedical and life science imaging than they are to high energy physics and MMA kind of signal detection activities in some sense. And so it's a little bit unclear to me why we think that that geophysics related things fit here, but we aren't also then looking at people that do, let's say, cancer detection in scans, which to me kind of has a very clear overlap into, let's say, penguin detection or ice wedge polygon detection. Anyhow, sorry. So, but yeah, LU, and then again, anybody that hasn't spoken would be great to hear ideas from as well.
So just to amplify our vision, we do use a lot of images. In fact, we just put a paper on that hit archive yesterday night, where we use images to predict neutron star mergers tens of seconds before they actually happen. And it is very similar to what doctors do. So this is, they call it deep learning forecasting. And this is very similar to what Paul was talking about yesterday. We do this maybe at a faster latency, but it's pretty much the same. So, you know, the overlap is very clear, at least from my perspective in geosciences. And does it apply also to people studying cancer? Well, of course. I mean, this is the beauty about these methodologies, right? That they don't care about the discipline. They are pretty generic.
I mean, so I guess, sorry, since nobody else is raising their hand, I'll just ask, so why don't we have any life science people that were invited to this workshop to talk? So
you may correct me here, Dan, but I think when we were, I don't know where you were in that project in the past, when we were writing a proposal, people mentioned that we need to be cautious about things that we mentioned related to maybe NIH-related projects, that they are not so very welcome in NSF space, but you can correct me. That was my understanding, that when you talk about NIH projects, or they are more closely related to NIH, NSF might tell you, well, maybe this doesn't fit in very well here, but correct me, this is the time to do that.
So I think the distinction between NIH and NSF here is that things that are used clinically are NIH, and NSF will not look at them. But the basic technologies are certainly things that NSF is interested in.
Yeah, and for example, I mean, animatized, anonymous images and processing and demonstration. It's just when you hit the actual clinical outcomes with life forms, that's where I think that distinction is. But there's a lot of space in the imaging for medicine that is, I think, in NSF scope. I think actually, as we talked about, fits very well into the AI. Activities.
So thanks, Mark. Just to let you know, we're trying to use the hands thing in participants.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. You
I had to join a little bit late because I had another meeting I couldn't miss. Sorry. And if there's other materials, you mentioned something in the chat. Sorry, I saw there wasn't that many people here. I thought I could just jump in. I'll raise my hand next time.
Anybody else? Phil, yeah.
Yeah. So, so just to agree with Ellie is that, image-based networks is kind of where we started in HEP as well. And we have I mean, we've gone beyond that, but also kind of a lot of people outside of image have gone beyond this. So for example, in Chowan's talk, he talked about, let's say, LiDAR-based approaches. And that's actually honestly the algorithms that have been a lot of focus recently have been using point cloud, so processing of point cloud data. So, I mean, on an algorithm side, I mean, I agree with Ellie, the overlap is quite large. But the other thing I would say is that if we claim the scope, you can in principle claim all of AI and all of science is somehow doing this, and so the scope kind of gets too large. This is the origins of the proposal was that real-time AI was like specifically understanding the hardware and motivating this was not something that most people were thinking about. And that was, I think, where we had traction. If we want to narrow the scope, but expand it a little bit, going along the lines of what Shuche was saying is if we can focus on hardware or good use of hardware, that might be a way to align things. So and just to kind of connect this to other work. So Paul's talk. So if you look at Paul's talk, I was happy to see he said, we had to get funding for Blue Waters, right? To continue it. The kind of, using effectively like a large cluster or large GPU clusters, the kind of thing that we've been thinking about in terms of how do we do this in real time. And you can imagine doing this for whatever field, right? And making it really like, here's the hardware infrastructure that we need to deploy this so that we can process as much data as fast as we can. Whether it's, and this again expands beyond the concept of real time because, there's a difference, let's say there's a difference in AI between latency and throughput. But I mean, in principle, we could expand our real-time project to say, we can also think about throughput, right? And that's kind of a way that you can put, all sorts of fields of science around this, provided they have a lot of data and they just need to process it as fast as they can. So that's one way to align things. If you start aligning things on the algorithms, I think you can, in principle, argue that everybody's doing something that's very similar. Because there's only so many AI algorithms. But I think if you do a hardware alignment, that might be a better way to kind of motivate an institute.
Right. So Mark. No.
Yeah. So I actually agree with what Phil was saying about expanding this, out from just low latency to throughput. I think that actually connects up. I wanted to just bring up something I've discussed with some of my colleagues on this, in relation to this proposal. I think one thing we have to be careful of is one thing that I think distinguishes, say, a smaller effort from an institute is the kind of community engagement and empowerment. So I think one thing I've been floating is that we could think about the institute, one element of the institute as being, assembling a critical mass of infrastructure and expertise whose primary goal is to empower other areas in science and medicine and so forth. And so, imagine that I was thinking sort of like user facilities where, like in physics, where like you go to Advanced Life Source or something where you bring your materials, your samples, and you have a science goal, and there are people at that, let's say, user facility, maybe a laboratory, whose job is really to help you do your science, right? Figure out how to, and so I was just thinking, in terms of the AI ML, you can imagine the Institute would provide exactly that. They would provide a means to for interpretability, visualization. How do you optimize for low latency, high throughput for your models? How do you make your models fair and so forth? Like basically that, I think that actually should be a big thrust of the proposal, is to create that infrastructure around expertise and also hardware. So how do I accelerate my model? Well, some researcher just knows that they have, the science goal and they have a small group and they want to partner with a big institute to figure out how to get the most out of their model for their science. And I think actually an institute could play that role.
Yeah, so that's I think I don't remember where this. Oh yeah, this came up from actually from Anna in a chat that she and I had on Slack yesterday while Paul was talking, or maybe right after Paul was talking, which was and then I think I mentioned this to a couple of the MMA folks as well, the SEMA folks as well. But the one idea is to follow the or the idea that Anna had, which kind of aligns with what Mark was saying, was effectively to look at what ECSS does for Exceed, and to think of part of an institute as basically providing a pool of expertise that people could propose projects to and get help with those projects for some period of time if they were well defined. And so I think that certainly is an interesting idea as well. I was also just going to throw out when I heard talks from the 2 AI institutes that were funded that are led at Illinois, one of the things that was clear in those AI institutes, which maybe is different than HDR institutes, is that they needed to be doing fundamental AI research as well as applying it, and they really had to combine those things. And so I guess I'm just kind of throwing that out as a question about the HDR and this is, I guess, partly based on what Phil was saying is, do we kind of treat AI algorithms as something that are kind of external, and we're right? The job of the HDR project is to work with them as they are produced and to test them and to apply them, or is the HDR Institute actually going to try to do any kind of computer science research to potentially to develop new algorithms or to try to modify existing algorithms in any way? Sorry, and I think Mark is next.
Yeah, okay, I'll be really brief because others had their hands up too. Yeah, just to respond, yeah, I think just to make sure people understand what I was suggesting earlier, which ties to this. I think what you describe in terms of some of the foundational AI is actually, so I wasn't suggesting that we simply engineer people's applications for them, to make them more performant, but somebody comes with their problem, and there's an expertise both in foundational AI and in sort of the engineering optimization that would say, hey, you know what, you can include this, physics inspired AI. You could totally do a different architecture. And maybe you have an interesting problem that we could develop some foundational aspect. And so that engagement is not just about optimization, but exactly about what you said as well. Okay, I'll mute.
Okay, Patrick goes next.
Yeah, just I have to sign off at 10. I apologize. I'll try and come back at 10:30. This is a very interesting discussion from my perspective. I want to just sort of say a little bit about how I see aspects of what we've been thinking about in SIMA and then sort of circle around. So within SIMA, there's no question we do have some interest in AI and ML, but it's been a small component that is really meant to be the application component rather than the infrastructure component. The thing that we've worried about most of all is actually having sufficient infrastructure to easily allow diverse groups of people to come together, assimilate data, process it rapidly, spin up collaborations to look at it and use the data, and to then and therefore to in a sense it's a very practical side of this. It's not been focused on hardware like the discussion here for the hardware specific tuning of AI, but it has been focused on sort of software cyber infrastructure side of things. Now, I personally think that is a large community-wide gap. At the HDR workshop in May, it was clear from multiple presentations that there is a massive gap there. People don't know how to get their data to a place where they can quickly collaborate. They hack Dropbox, they hack Google, they throw data on websites that go up and down. And so that's where we're focused. Now, I actually, listening to this, can see two visions that actually could work well within the HDR as it's been described by the likes of Amy Walton and others when they've presented the vision for it, where they want to have complementary institutes that hook together through a network into something that covers the landscape. It's clear from the discussion here that there's overlap with what we've been thinking about in SIMA, but it's not where the emphasis of the intellectual thrust is. I do think one of the things that, so it's been on our mind, and you heard in some of the comments I made yesterday, one of the things that we are very concerned about when we have a diverse community that aren't used to working together is how we bring value to the community. It's easy for us all to know how we bring value to ourselves and the postdocs in our group, but you've got to figure out how you're delivering to the community. And I think that sort of here today, right, there's the germ of an idea of linking various groups and communities together, but the implementation needs some plan, and I don't right now hear more than we're going to allow ourselves to transfer some knowledge back and forth across the boundaries as best we can, right, through workshops, through the standard kind of approaches. So I guess I'd still like to hear, the thoughts I'm making in concrete. And I'd also, while I'll be gone for the next half hour, and so won't be able to listen to the responses, I will listen to the recording if I can get hold of it. I would also like to hear this, where things lie in terms of this gap area of being able to get these diverse groups working together and quickly spun up to do things. So, all right. Sorry to have to sign off right after making this comment, but hopefully it's useful to have some conversation, and I'll listen in on the recording after.
Okay, Phil?
Yeah, so just to reply to your comment, Dan, about where foundational AI does fit. So even in the HDR proposal, we have Song. He's part of our HDR proposal or grant or whatever. And the foundational component there is, it's not, we're not trying to, let's say, create new algorithms, but we are trying to make algorithms more efficient, right? And that's, let's say, a much smaller part of the scope in the sense that it doesn't cover all of AI, but it covers, what you need to run a real-time system or even a high throughput system. So that's a scope that, I think it, fits at least in the context of what we've been doing. Expanding this, right, is an interesting discussion, right? Especially given, let's say, the HDR, like the last talk we saw yesterday. I've been trying to think of ways foundational AI, we could expand the scope of foundational AI in a way that would help both real-time system or even just large processing of data. I don't have any conclusions, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay, Chris?
There's a bit of a lag, but I also wanted to try answering your question, which was on, how much foundational AI do you need? Because as I understand it, the HDR, the whole program is to enable data-driven discovery. So our HDR is more about algorithmic design, but it really depends on the science, right? How many people have taken the low-hanging fruits? Sciences that are closer to vision problems that don't have as much foundational work to do, other sciences might. So once you figure out the scope on the science, then I think it'll tell you how much foundational work you need. Or maybe you go the other way around.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, so I can't quite put my hand up, but I tried to indicate it in chat. So I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about two external things that I think maybe are interesting to consider as we're having this discussion that came up kind of from listening to other people's comments. So one is a visualization center that I was involved in designing at LSU, where we kind of thought about the visualization activities as a pyramid. in some sense, where we would have kind of 3 levels, and most things would fall on the bottom level, and some things would be in the middle, and a very few things would be at the top. And the bottom level was a walk-up facility that we were creating in that library, where we would have some grad students and some undergrads, where people could come in and they could ask questions. And if those questions were things that could just be answered immediately, then they would be answered, and that was the bottom level. And the middle level was things that would be done by grad students and by some staff, which were that we knew what the answers were, but we couldn't just tell somebody the answer. We had to actually work with them for a while to show them the answer, whether that was like how to get data into a visualization tool or how to use different visualization algorithms or things like that. And then the top one was things where where the center didn't know the answer. And so the center's job then was to set up a collaboration with people that were doing relevant research and kind of hand it off to them so that the person would have something that would come back to them. And so I guess the reason I'm kind of bringing up this model is that I kind of see from what Mark was saying a little bit that maybe we're working in some combination of these two, the kind of the middle and the top tier here. And that foundational question that's in the top is maybe the question about how much we focus on that versus how much we focus more on the middle and kind of applying things that are known for people that maybe don't know how to apply them or don't know how to do them at scale or something like that. And then the second thing that I was going to mention, which is actually completely unrelated, is I'm just going to put into chat, which is this German NFDI program, which I've been a little bit involved in some ways, and I think it's really interesting as a model of a bunch of different data-driven infrastructure projects that are all mostly discipline specific, but also have to work together to share common algorithms and common methods. And so this is something like, I think they're funding this at something like 70 million euros a year. So it's a fairly large activity with a bunch of different projects. And some of those, I think there's something like 8 or 10 that have been funded up at this point, and there's another round of 8 or 10 that they're planning to review and then fund in the next maybe 6 to 9 months. And then there's going to be another set of proposals for a final, I don't know if it's 8 to 10, but a final set that would be funded or proposed maybe next year and then funded after that. And so I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is that I wonder if one thing that might come out of this discussion is that we actually don't have an HDR proposal, but potentially we have a few HDR proposals with different people leading them, where we actually kind of pitch them together and talk about how they are going to work together if they're all funded, and kind of pitch this as an idea. Or potentially, and this is a little bit farther from what we're talking about here, but it's kind of interesting to me, would be actually going to NSF and pitching some kind of a coordinating office that maybe is different than the coordinating office that I think that there was a call for fairly recently. I haven't kept up with that, so I don't know what's happened with that. But maybe it would be kind of a more technical coordinating office rather than a more programmatic coordinating office, which I think is what they called for. Okay, Mark.
I was just about to lower it because I think you addressed, what you're describing. There was a call for coordinating HDR activities. Is that a different solicitation?
No, there was that call, and I kind of saw it, but I didn't pay enough attention to it. And I guess
I kind of saw it and thought, okay, that's an interesting meta kind of Uber thing. And I thought about it in the context. But I hadn't really, until you mentioned it now, about the possibility of sending in a set, and maybe this would actually be I'd have to look more into it, but maybe this would be a vehicle for coordinating if we were to do multiples. I don't know whether the time, probably it really warrants an NSF discussion, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure when I saw that, when you just mentioned it, it was for HDR, right? This coordinating umbrella proposal or solicitation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually, so maybe just ask, was anybody here involved in a proposal to that, besides what Chris was saying about knowing about some of the data hubs?
Yeah, just letters of collaboration. But...
Okay. Okay, again, so if anybody that hasn't said anything wants to, this certainly would be a great time to hear more things. It seems like we could branch off into a different direction at this point. Okay, I've been practicing on uncomfortable silences as a way of getting people to talk, but I'm not quite that uncomfortable. So I don't know. So where do we go at this point?
Sorry to interrupt that. So it seems that we have quite a few things to consider. It seems that what is emerging is for the institute that we may propose, institute idea, we definitely want to keep as a key component the development of innovative hardware solutions, answering Siche question. And we definitely want to incorporate that because it is quite relevant for different domains that are dealing with big data sets. So we definitely want to incorporate that. There are other things that will also be relevant. And I think this is one of the key things we want to deliver, that the Institute is a center or a place for translational research, right? We don't want people to continue believing that their problems are unique, that they are isolated or cut off from the world trying to solve their problems, that they are very common. And we want to actually accelerate the development of algorithms to meet their solutions by leveraging what is happening in other areas. And just to bring people to the realization that, well, the adoption of AI has evolved at different rates in different disciplines. So let's go and learn from those that have been using these algorithms for some time so that they don't create the wheel anymore. So we avoid duplication. So I think we are all in agreement with that idea. And what you have described, Dan, in terms of how we can have this organized approach to engage with different communities sounds really interesting. So I think it might be good if in the overleaf document or in the Google Doc that all of you have access right now, if we go and add some comments about how we start shaping this vision, in a clear way. I think themes there are translational research, innovative hardware, better architectures, domain-inspired optimization schemes, etc. How do we go and shop at these type of things and then people benefit from them? How do we make this open source so that people can get access to them, refine them, tweak them, etc.? So I think those are interesting components of an institute and bring a lot of value to different communities. But then again, we don't want to have too many different flavors, otherwise no one is going to own the institute, right? So we need to be careful with the choice of disciplines that we represent as main drivers. And so when we're going to write the overleaf document in the next few days, let's make sure that we think very carefully, we think long enough about how we present this to the community, because this is going to be our business card.
Right. So I guess one question that I have thinking about this, and again, just thinking about the fact that we are a set of people who have overlapping interests and might be interested in something that can be identified as a single proposal, or maybe have interest in things that, again, could be multiple proposals that interact and support each other. I wonder then kind of how we talk to the other set of people that have HDR institutes already. And how if we are thinking about, right, kind of supporting things, if we would want to maybe propose before we actually write proposals, having some discussion with other potential teams as well, like some kind of a community meeting where we talk in that way, or if we want to, in some sense, kind of put a stake in the ground and say, like, this is the area that we're going to work in, and we want other people that are interested in this area to work kind of to work with us collaboratively. And we hope that nobody else is going to be writing a proposal that directly competes with us and rather, again, complements us. So I kind of can imagine lots of different things here. And I guess maybe a question is for the people that were at the HDR PI meeting, was there any kind of discussion about how different projects would collaborate in terms of next round proposals? And is there anything else kind of relevant from that meeting that we should be trying to factor into our discussion as well and into the white paper? So I think Adam is first and then Chris.
Yeah, so I was at the meeting. There were some probably informal discussions between different people, but actually guidance from NSF on the next round was pretty sparse as far as I remember. So it really wasn't very clear, at least in my recollection of it. Other people who were there may have a different opinion. I know Chris Turnell was there, for example, because I spoke to him at it.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I don't have so much to add to that. Beyond, there were lots of plans, but I think COVID derailed most of them. So.
And,
Amy did say that they were planning to stick to their timeline, which I guess is not the case because we haven't heard an RFP yet. But they certainly said they were planning to stick to their original timeline.
Okay, so I think we have Ellie and then Mark, but I'll just jump in for 1 second and say that the process of writing solicitations and getting them out ends up often being much more painful than the program officers think it's going to be, and there's rounds of review that end up just adding weeks and months that surprise everybody. So, so they almost, I mean, just based on the timeline, it seems like they almost certainly have something that's drafted. And it must be going through some kind of review process at this point, whether it's kind of review of program officers or higher level review. Sorry, so and I guess, sorry, so the reason I was saying that is that I don't think that we have the opportunity at this point to change anything that's in that, but I think we still can figure out how we're going to interact kind of irrelevant to that or just with knowledge of what we think that's going to be. Sorry, let's see, so Mark put his hand down, so I guess Elliot.
So in the HDRPI meetings, and Phil can add more to this, there was a very deliberate effort by NSF to get people to talk from different projects. And one thing that Amy mentioned multiple times is we have tens of HDR grants, tripods, frameworks, and I always forget the other one. We have tens of them. We are going to fund between 5 to 7 for the institute phase. There is no way all the projects are going to go through the first cut. So it is up to you to go and create those synergies with other projects. They said be proactive about engaging with other HDR PIs. Make sure that you create synergies, make sure that you reach convergence, because many of you will not be funded for phase 2. So, they were very clear. You need to create synergies, you need to amalgamate efforts that make sense, and you need to do it quick because the deadline for phase 2 is coming up fast.
Okay, and Mark in chat suggested that we list the funded HDRs in the Google Doc, which I think seems like a good idea.
I will put this in a drive, Google Drive, and then I will put the docs file that has all the PIs.
Okay, Phil, sorry.
Yeah, so the one thing I would say is, I guess Chris and Adam, they've been organizing another kind of HDR, I guess it was a newsletter. So, I mean, there's other efforts going on as well. And then there was some other groups of people who've had who've invited us to workshops and stuff. I mean, there are other things of people trying to connect. And, we've actively, we've all reached out to, everybody's reached out to each other. I still, all right, that's all I can say. I mean, I don't, none of this I think has converged to a coherent set of ideas. But at least people are reaching out.
Yeah, so people know the newsletter idea was just to be able to announce community building workshops to one another, since there's so many different efforts going, to have something at the rate of like once per month or two, very low rate, but just people advertising sort of milestones. So if anyone has something for that, they can tell me or Adam about that, and we can sort of put it into one of these. But it's meant to be like super apolitical, just to be clear.
Well, so we scheduled another 40 minutes. I don't know if we have more to talk about here, or we're kind of at a stopping point where work should now kind of transition to being electronic over the next however long. Phil?
Yeah, so I'm still trying. So in the document, should we just, I mean, I guess we need to summarize what was in the workshop, but I guess there's going to be some section into how do we make some clear vision. So I mean, is there some idea for how we organize this? I mean, do we each write paragraphs and then, you know, something coherent comes out of this?
Yeah, Phil, the idea is we first provide the summary of what we did for the workshop, how we engage with the community, and then we talk about how we transition from who we are right now to the Institute idea. So we provide the mission and vision statement. We say we are expanding the breadth and the scope of the original HDR project into these disciplines, and this is why. And so Paul and Xiaowen can provide a paragraph about why it makes sense to join forces with them. And then we provide this document where we invite the community to provide suggestions, comments in preparation for the next town hall. And we provide the information in that white paper about dates and all of that. And we need to do that fast, like within the next 10 days. So a 2-3 page document is enough.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, sorry, Mark, one second. I guess I was wondering if, well, okay, so if this is a 2 or 3 page document, I guess that's fine. I was going to suggest an alternative would be to actually think about 2 documents, one being a report on this workshop and one being more of a white paper going forward, because I feel like there actually could be a fair amount of work that could go into a report on this workshop with each person maybe providing a paragraph about their talk. And a white paper then could more just summarize it, but not actually go into the details of any of the talks, but just talk about the topics of the talks instead. But maybe that all goes, maybe if this is just a short document, that's fine. Ellie, you any thought on that before, and then jump to Mark?
I think, coordinating 50 plus people to add text to a document is a good idea, but that should be longer term. We need to provide something that is fast enough to organize the next town hall. And so I think we can do both with the understanding that we will have 2 time scales for these 2 different documents.
Okay, sorry, Mark?
That's okay. No, I'm just having trouble keeping with the flow of the conversation with the hands. So I'm just going to be jumping in if it's all right. Yeah, I think that, so I want to understand a little bit better. We talk about a white paper. I do want to understand this point better because some of it I might have missed before I could join. But before I say that, I do think there's a risk. I've collaborated with a number of you on a number of proposals. I think sometimes I see a mistaken thrust to just, put an overleaf document out there and then really push people to contribute text and then hope that something organic comes out of it. I think this is a case where we really would benefit by developing and agreeing on a vision for the Institute before we start strongly suggesting different groups start, plopping down lots of text and documents. So other proposals, okay, but this one I really think we should all agree on the scope, the vision, the people, the projects involved, the kind of science involved. Like we talked about, medicine, but well, not medicine. We talked about imaging, Maybe I don't know if some aspects of like neuroscience should come in. I'm not saying they should, but maybe you could think of some aspects there. So I think we should first get all on the same page before we begin to compel people to write. That would be my strong suggestion here. As far as what actually happens writing wise, so is the plan in short term to put out a white paper? Is that a summary of this workshop, or is that a sort of guidance for the next town hall, or both? Can you summarize, Dan, what documents are coming out when, especially on the short term, and what we should be developing?
I can summarize by turning this to Elio.
Okay, or Elio, yeah, whoever.
So what we want to do fairly soon, which is within the next 10 days, Mark, is we want to let people know that this team is in creation and that we have pretty interesting scope, bringing together MMA, high energy physics, and geosciences, and some core expertise in hardware and AI. So we want people to know about us, okay? And that we're building the community and that we're taking insights from them for the creation of an institute, an HDR institute. So this we want to do within the next 10 days. So discussions about the vision, the mission of the institute should happen fairly soon. So those who are involved in this, the ones that already are engaged in these HDR and CSSI grants, we should have a meeting in the next few days to nail this down and make sure that we have a shared agreement on what we want to accomplish.
Agreed. I would say, this people know about our interest because, there's some people. So I was wondering who you mean by people, because like this was mentioned at the schema meeting, right? So this has been oozing out. What would be the distribution of such a white paper in your vision? So
what we want to make sure is to ask people from their different communities to circulate in their mailing lists. We're going to put this in archive. We're going to ask Raf to circulate this within LSST and other colleagues within their community so that this has the greatest impact that we can achieve.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I see Eric has his hand up, so I want to be polite. But yeah, something on archive and something that can then be distributed kind of in our communities. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Eric?
I think the summary of the workshop as a form of communication to NSF is, of course, a must-have. And I think this is going to be a good way to wrap up this workshop, at least in our interactions with NSF. I'm trying though to understand a little bit better what this white paper, maybe, this is actually a question also that Mark and others have raised, Elio. Let's say, as part of this process where this white paper is communicated, what is your expectation? Namely, do you envision, let's say, 20 institutions and 40 PIs come knocking on the door? I think it goes back to what Mark mentioned, namely, before we start writing anything, I think it's going to be helpful to identify what is, let's say, the main thrust of the institute, and and identify the key areas that you would like to have on that. Because at some point, it's going to be limited by, if you use the funding, and also practical aspects. And this is maybe something that we could discuss. Maybe we should discuss before the end of the hour. Namely, at what point an organization becomes if you wish, unmanageable. Namely, it is way too much spread out, and at the end up it boils down to, if you wish, half of a student. That half of an FTE, you cannot really accomplish as much as integer arithmetics when it comes to people and participation in projects. So, as I mean, reaching out to the community is, of course, a good thing, and I think you've done a great job as part of this workshop. So I'm trying to think, what do you expect to hear once this white paper is out?
So let me address this. Sorry, Adam, to interrupt, but let me just get the answer out quickly. In the Google Doc that I shared with you, right at the top of the document is, we don't want a very large number of institutions leading this project, because then there is no money to do anything. So what we want to do by engaging with the community is to say there will be a small number of institutions leading this project, basically the core HDR institutions that we have, and maybe adding another place like Minnesota for geosciences. But we want to engage the community to get their input through these town halls and to make sure that they realize that through the institute, we will be addressing their needs. So we don't want to have a lot of institutions as part of the institute, but we want to make sure that we're engaging with them in an effective way, that what we are doing effectively is addressing their concerns.
Yeah, Adam, I guess, and then back to Eric.
Yeah, so I'm not taking a particular position on this. What I'll say is, with software engineers, including people who have PhDs and have moved more into the software engineering realm, we've actually, in similar, as Mario said, we found it very functional with fractional FTEs because of the way funding works. Quite often they have other projects that they're involved with, and in many cases we benefit from that. I would agree that it's going to be different with grad students and postdocs and so on. But when you look at the sort of activities that are going to be conducted, if you're after sort of professional software engineering, then I do think you can slice and dice that. That's a different thing, though, to when you're engaged in something that looks more like research activity.
Eric?
I actually want to follow up on what Adam just described. Can you ask Adam how many PIs and how many institutions are involved in CIMA? Yeah,
so off the top of my head, it's not a collaborative proposal. That was partly driven by the deadline and the administrative hassle. So it's a standard sort of 1 PI and 4 co-Is, but the number of institutions who receive sub-awards, I believe, is 10. Now, there's a lot of sort of faculty who are on a very small amount of money, and then it's software engineers, and other specialists. So I think there's probably 7 or 8 fractional people there. That turns into something like 3.5 FTEs. Or I don't remember exactly. So these numbers could be a bit off, and obviously we're 2-year funded, and hiring people takes time. So some people are in place and so on. But that's the sort of we've got people who are about a half of an FTE.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm coming back to I guess my skepticism on that white paper and the remaining process LU. Do you think that a town hall is going to be able to attract, let's pick gravitational waves and astrophysics, multi-messenger astrophysics? Do you think that it's going to manage to attract more folks than what this very workshop accomplished? I guess what here's my train of thought here. I think that there is going to be value in writing down what Mark said, namely the vision for that institute, and identify in broad or maybe not so broad terms what are the key, let's say, data-driven science and engineering that it is envisioned to embrace. But would it be more efficient, if you wish, and effective if, let's say, people like, for example, Paul, he probably has well, he surely has the global view of what's happening in geosciences, for example. And maybe there are other events or other meetings where, he's going to be in a better position to assess whether we've reached out to the right audience and, how much room at the end of the day is between overlapping versus complementary effort in the specific area of geosciences. Look, I realize that what I'm saying it may sound as if I'm not welcoming or I'm not open to making that really as broad as it can be. I do want to see that be as open as it can be. The only thing that I'm trying to appreciate here is how pragmatic we are as to, first of all, what is the funding? So somebody should sit down and say, look, this is a $5 million per year. We want to have 10 PIs or, how many PIs, what is the areas, and have some rough picture of, we can afford that many graduate students, that many postdocs. And then you say, look, you can surely not put, let's say, 5 postdocs in high-energy physics or 5 postdocs on MMA. You have to make sure that all the contributors and the institutes makes impactful contributions to a broad area of sciences. And, as we're talking about maybe, for example, biology and medicine to the extent that it can be funded by NSF. So I cannot see, for example, how this is going to happen from a town hall. I cannot see how biologists or cancer research scientists are going to show up in that town hall and going to tell us, oh, I want to be into that. So it seems to me that somebody that either has direct or indirect knowledge or has access to the community should go and reach out and say, look, this is what we're doing. We need to, we would like to work with you. Is there anyone willing to come on board? This is our vision. This is our mission. I don't know. Somehow I feel that we need to go to the field rather than the field coming to us.
Yeah. Since nobody has their hand up, I will. You shouldn't feel bad. I share. I can feel what you're saying, and I share that cautious hesitation a little bit because one thing when you take actions like put something out and organize, it can become counterproductive. I think you've alluded to a number of ways. I would also say one way. I mean, I view one way. There are two ways. Two of the ways you can make this broadly impactful an institute like this. Either you can fund for the same funding amount. You can either fund a lot of, you can fund some effort specifically inside the walled garden of the institute for all the areas you care about. There you have the problem of splitting the funding, as Eliu mentioned, and being not super impactful on the larger scale by doing that. Another way is to have a core effort that is well funded and well supported within the institute that has sufficient hardware resources, whether they be funded by the grant or otherwise, and a real core expertise base that their impact in other fields goes through their engagement. And you could do both, of course. There's a trade-off between the two. But maybe I come back from Eliu's comment that one way we could think about being really impactful is to have this enabling core where I'm thinking like some small effort comes and says I have this problem, and we have we can, instead of them go acquire through their purchasing an Alveo card and they find some CS person to help them, and then they could very quickly go to some institute with the resources and expertise and actually will, through the mandate of the grant, to help them very quickly and effectively understand their problem, benchmark, visualize, interpret, whatever. So, I mean, that would be an option. I just would say that I think that we need some time to flesh this out. This goes into the vision thing we're discussing before, and we should be careful about coming out too quickly without being thoughtful. But at the same time, I'd like to hear the constraints on the timing, because Eliu, you sort of is saying we should do this soon, coming down from like you want to put out a white paper in a week or so. is that timeline driven by our concern that others are assembling, or from an NSF directive, or what sets that timeline?
So let me just say two things, and thanks, Eric, for sharing your thoughts and concerns. The idea of being open about what we are doing, I think, goes back to a project that happened at NCSA, which was the Blue Waters project. So at the time when people were thinking about the petascale needs of the community in the US, there were many approaches to fund that resource. One was, we're going to be cagey and we're going to propose the best supercomputer that comes to mind. Those projects failed. And then there was a project that organized these open town halls or conferences or meetings, if you want. And the team that led the effort gathered all the insights from the community. They put in the proposal what were the actual needs of the entire community. And the proposal did not have 40 PIs. Right? There were just a couple of people that led the effort, as it is similar to what I am envisioning here. Just a few people will be leading the effort, but that effort will be informed by the needs of the community. And this is what I want to accomplish with the town halls. We want to hear these needs, and we want to put them in the proposal and say, this is what we hear from the community. This is what we saw as strategic areas of development to make sure that we are accelerating science and development in the next decade. This is the main goal of these town halls, to write a proposal that is actually informed by the needs of a diverse community. This is not about going and finding 20 more PIs. That will not happen. And this is what we want to say in the proposal as well, that to have the greatest impact, this should be a well-funded effort with as many students and postdocs that we can fund. And then we are going to be working on projects that they have told us are critical in their domains. I think this is the model that we should try to go after.
So I was going to actually kind of disagree with that, but I think Adam's going to, so I'll let him do it because he has his hand up.
Well, I don't think it might be somewhat orthogonal or a rephrasing of it. What I was going to say is I think something that's built or organized as an institute shouldn't look like it's just funding a whole bunch of PI science, because that's the sort of thing that NSF does. They don't have to give you money to then have you do it. So to some extent, there has to be an organization that gives money for deliverables and then assesses whether deliverables have been delivered. So that's different to the way the NSF gives money. It gives you money for 3 years and you come back, and whatever you decide to do with it is okay, essentially, although it may affect your ability to get more. But if you're an institute and you're an ongoing concern, then in order for you to deliver value on the money you're given and then you dispense, that there has to be some mechanism for ensuring that the work that's being done is, as Elliot was talking about, the work that the community needs doing.
Right. So I guess I would just reinforce that very slightly before we go to Phil, which would be to say that from my point of view, without knowing a huge amount about what the call is actually going to say, having a small number of PIs and having all the work done by their grad students and postdocs, to me, doesn't seem like it's going to be an effective institute. It seems like that would be an effective large research project. But for there to be an institute, I feel like there have to be some number of professional staff, and the balance of staff and postdocs and students has to get worked out based on whatever the call ends up saying and what the idea of the proposal ends up being.
I think I agree with that, but I'm sorry to interrupt, Dan, but just to clarify this, what I just meant to say is that we're not going to spend all the money on 40 plus PIs, but there will be money on the workforce that will be producing the deliverables. So what I just meant to say is that the money will not be spread too thinly that nothing can be accomplished.
Yeah. So right. Okay. So that's fine. I guess if we look at the software institutes that exist now, like IRIS-HEP as an example, right, there has to be some money that goes into management, and so it's not. Right, it's not PIs that are getting money to be PIs and supervise their students, but It's money that's going to people that are doing specific management tasks to make the institute work, which maybe is with their students, but it may be with students in other places or staff in other places as well. Okay, sorry, Phil was next. And then Mark.
Yeah, well, so I'm just going to disagree more with Eliu, and maybe a little more harshly, which basically is, to paraphrase a little bit, I mean, Eliu, you're suggesting that, you know, we make an institute that solves everybody's problems. And I'm not sure, like, an institute that's like solves everybody's problems is a great way to, you know, to build an institute, in the sense that, you know, I mean, you can build a group of people, right? You can identify a lot, you know, some core problems and get a small number of people to solve it. But I don't think it's, you know, in the end, right, you want the whole community to be engaged with this, right? I think, you know, it kind of like expands the scope too much for this project. So I mean, I just want to bring it back to like where we started with HDR, which was we had like a clear subfield, like real-time AI, that nobody is investing, you know, there's been limited investment and research into it. Yet there are a number of obvious problems, right? Multi-messenger astronomy, high-energy physics. I mean, Chris is here, there's the SNOOS effort, which is related. I think it might be, I think we should, if we want to bring this down to an institute level, we should have a common theme, right? That we can, you know, like build around, right? This is what we did for the AI Institute at MIT for physics, is that as long as we have a common theme that we can build something around it, I think it makes it clear, right? If we open the door, I mean, and we already clearly have a common theme, right? You know, or I wouldn't say clearly, we already have a common theme, at least of people in the room, which is AI and computing related. I think if we can get a clear message on this, you know, we can still have town halls, but we should you know, really align along a theme, and you know, if people's talks are not aligned with that, we should say, look, this is our focus. But I think if we have a common like theme that could be broad now, it makes it a lot easier to kind of put together a proposal, an institute proposal.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think our theme, well, in my own opinion, I think our theme should be that, you know, there's now the MIT Institute, there's a lot of foundational AI. What this institute is about bringing AI to the real-time domain, to accelerate science and inference and learning in kind of real time. And I almost thought you were kind of moving towards, which is okay, disagreeing with what I was saying about enabling lots of efforts. I think the Institute has to have at least two pillars. One of them is rallying around that theme and specific, applicable science applications. You mentioned them. That has to be a core of the Institute. But I think that will also fail if that's the vision, because then it becomes an institute getting together. It was like Eric, I think, mentioned earlier, you know, like basically getting people together to drive their stuff, you know, through the grant. And then, Dan actually mentioned it becomes a large research grant, which we don't want to do. So one of the pillars is that, but I really feel like there has to be another big aspect of enabling beyond those applications through, you know, shared knowledge, and also like, Iris Hub, you know, I was part of putting that together, and, you know, I would say one thing, process matters as much as content. I think many of you know what I mean there. So I actually like kind of having some town hall-ish stuff. We have to make sure that we have our vision laid out first, but something about community engagement, that process, even if we don't get, somebody said, oh, well, are we going to get as many people as this workshop? In some sense, we want it to be, you know, the process matters a lot, because when we write our proposal, we can then stand behind a process and not just the outcomes, but the outcomes matter. But anyway, I just want to say that I think that, like in this case, we would want to have, Iris Hub had a lot of software engineers, but it also had experimental operation programs that then funded the operations of those things. Here, we have to think through a little bit. You know, I think here it's not only software engineers, but actually there could be, you know, technical people on hardware, and also some mix of hardware, which we didn't have in the Iris Hub Institute. There's no hardware funded, essentially. Here we might think about actually providing a substrate of hardware, real-time modern hardware that accelerates real-time AI, And maybe that's through credits or some other way, but I think there has to be a hardware footprint and a technical footprint, and not just software developers to make such an institute work. All right, I'm going to mute. Said enough.
Right. So we're actually running out of time in 12 more minutes. So this is not a tremendously useful comment, but I will just say, Mark, I like the fact that your hand was up, but then your hand went back down, and then you talked anyhow. So
because no one else had their hand up. Sorry.
It's okay. And just thanks. So I think, to me at least, based on what Phil was saying, and Mark as well, I do feel like we need to come up with a vision or a focus or whatever we want to call it. And it seems like that really is not necessarily part of the white paper, but almost happens before the white paper. Or, I mean, it could be part of it as well, and it just gets done in it. But so I guess I'm kind of wondering, can we do that just by working on a collective document, or do we actually need to have some kind of a follow-up discussion where we talk about this? Yes, Elliot?
Let's use the Google Doc. Let's use the Google Doc for this. I'll put some pointers on defining vision and mission, and let's give us maybe 1 week to work on this.
Okay. Just before we go to Phil and then Mark, I will say that my experience with a Google Doc is that just having a Google Doc, unless there's actually somebody that's kind of notifying people to look at it every day, or people are commenting and you get notified through the Google Doc, you end up writing something and then you forget about it for a week. And so I think having it is fine, but we also need something that drives a little bit of iteration, not just the document itself. Phil.
Yeah, so just to expand Elliot's suggestion, I would say, why don't we have a Google Doc and everybody writes like a paragraph of what they think a vision should be, and then we make somebody, perhaps Elliot, merges all of these into a single vision. Maybe I'm not sure if that's the right approach. I was thinking we write a vision now, right, based on our discussion, and then everybody writes a paragraph about how their project could be related to the vision. So, which actually maybe that's the most concrete proposal, and then we retune the vision based on people's input, right?
Okay, I think that's okay. I guess the problem that I would have with that is everybody kind of writing how their part fits into the vision means that we already have all the right people versus thinking about the vision and then trying to figure out what the parts are, and maybe we go to people externally that aren't here.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe everybody writing their own vision makes sense as well. I don't know. It's a suggestion.
No, I don't know either. Okay, Mark and then Javier.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment, kind of what Phil was saying earlier. I think having another discussion should follow us having some, kind of alone time each with the Google Doc to be able to, write down what we think the vision of I would focus specifically on the vision, the big picture of the Institute, and not spend, you can talk about how your stuff is connected, like your things we're doing research on, but just getting together people's ideas on the vision. Then we can, we should have a deadline, say, get it in by X, and then we should arrange another discussion around that point specifically and move from there.
Okay, so I think that's kind of an action for Elio at this point as the leader of this meeting. Javier.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I think Phil's suggestion of everyone writing their own version of it makes the most sense. And then, not even requiring LU to merge it as much as just actually comparing and contrasting what they look like. So we can all kind of read each other's. And then, yeah, maybe there's a follow-up meeting where we just synthesize all of it into one overarching thing. And then from there, it makes it, I think that's a good first step.
So let me just say, let's put as deadline this Friday to add our paragraphs, Friday at noon Central Time. So we have plenty of time to digest what we have been discussing. And before we start forgetting, we go and write down our thoughts. So this Friday at noon, and I'll send an email with this information. And then once I go and read what is going on, I'll send you a doodle poll for a meeting next week. And at that meeting, we will not be just talking, we will just be working on the document, refining, editing, etc. And then the outcome of that meeting next week will be to have, a crisp, clear vision of what we want to accomplish. How does that sound?
So I think the only thing that I would say is do the doodle poll now. Don't wait until Friday.
Will do. Yes.
Other comments from anybody? I guess I also see Eric's message in chat that I'm not completely sure if we've kind of been talking about anyhow, or if it's if Eric feels like it's something different that we should actually be talking about in the next 6 minutes still. So Eric?
I think we've addressed it effectively. I think this is the direction we're taking, Dan. Good. Thanks, Mark and Phil. I think this is going to be a good way to move forward. Now, for a time, since doodle polls present on their own a challenge, how about we meet exactly the same time, namely next Wednesday? Clearly, we're here today, maybe ditching some other meetings, hopefully not classes. Can we meet same time, same day, a week from today?
And we can use the same Zoom link I just
Same
sent.
channel. Yeah. Anyways, I'm thinking loud because I did another meeting, and I'm willing to do that once more next week to move us forward with that. But again, I'm thinking loud and thinking also how tedious and nobody's gonna. I don't know. I'm thinking loud right now. So I will choose it.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I guess I would rather actually do the poll. We may not get everybody, but if we can do it and everybody kind of fills it out today, then we could have something set by tomorrow morning that works for the most of us.
I'll circulate a little poll at the end of the meeting then.
Okay. Okay. 5 minutes left. Anything else that we really need to talk about today?
I think we are done.
Okay, good. So thanks to everybody who stayed here for this time, and thanks to Eliu for doing lots of work in leading the organization of the workshop overall, and all the other people who were also involved in the organization in one way or another. I think I was probably the least involved, but lots of other people did good stuff. So.
Yeah, it was excellent. Thank you, everybody, for organizing it.
Indeed, a round of applause for Eliu and the folks at UIUC. That was a nicely organized meeting, Eliu. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your help.
Thank you, Eliu.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.